In the United States, there is growing anger following a police shooting of an unarmed black woman in the state of Illinois. Authorities released this body cam footage showing the moments leading to the fatal shooting. The woman, 36-year-old Sonya Massey, had called 911 to report a suspected intruder. Two deputies responded. One of them told Massey to check on a pot of boiling water. He then told her to drop the pot of hot water and shot her. He has been charged with murder. Let's listen in to the father of Sonya Massey speaking after the release of the video.
But you know what I want? I want justice for my baby.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
You killed the wrong black woman this time.
Amen. Amen.
We can now speak to constitutional law professor Gloria Browne-Marshall from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. So we just saw body cam footage of this latest killing, and to be frank, it is some of the most shocking I've ever seen. What exactly, if anything, can we learn from it?
We can learn that we have police officers who have a great deal of power, and they are using excessive force against unarmed civilians. Yes, she had a pot of boiling water. He told her to go to the stove to pick up the pot. She was dealing with mental illness, and that is a difficult situation for anyone, especially those in law enforcement called to a stranger's home. But the use of deadly force is only under law to be used when an officer faces deadly force. He knew there was no deadly force. There was no weapon that she was hiding. It was a pot of scalding water. He could have stepped back out of the way of the pot of scalding water. Instead, he chose to shoot her a number of times, one of those bullets to the face, and told her in advance he was going to shoot her in the face. What we see in the United States is abuse of power by law enforcement in ever-growing numbers. Over 1,200 people have been killed by law enforcement just this year. Civilians killed by law enforcement, shot by law enforcement this year. 10,000 people almost since 2015. And the only reason why we know this is because the Washington Post newspaper keeps the data. We don't even have clear data from the FBI and other government sources. We have to have media keep the data for us to keep up with the number of people who have been killed by police. So we have a situation that is out of control and continues to be out of control, and we need national criminal justice reform.
Those are some truly shocking numbers. It's hard not to think of the murder of George Floyd when watching this video. Is this a race relations issue that we're seeing in this case, or you've already alluded to a certain extent, is this a more broader issue of training and general police culture around the use of force?
I would say, as someone who writes about legal history and history generally regarding race, that this is a race issue, but it's also an issue that this country has been grappling with for centuries. And we need to understand that even before the United States was formed, law gave white people the power to kill people of African descent and Native Americans with impunity. There was a law that there would be no felony conviction following the killing of a person of African descent. This was a law from the 1600s. And so we have been living century after century with the ability of white people to kill people of color with impunity. And then on top of that, we have law enforcement that sometimes we're not even sure what their racial mindset is, but they seem to find a restraint when it comes to whites with mental illness, when it comes to whites who are armed, and yet when it comes to people of color, in particular African Americans, they fire and fear for their lives. They fire their weapons with impunity and fear for their lives. And so we have to say that there's a race-based component to this. We also have to say that it's not just training. This young man, 30 years old, had already worked at least 5 police departments since May of 2023. So during this short 1.5-year period, he had already worked at 5 police departments. Obviously, it wasn't training that was a problem. He was the problem. So we have race issues. We have people who are going from department to department with their own racial bias, and they're able to play out their racial bias. I think the last component is the fact that prosecutors are not prosecuting as often as they should. In this case, we have a prosecutor who's actually asked for an indictment, received the indictment of this man. He is charged with first-degree murder and aggravated assault. Unfortunately, first-degree murder is so difficult to prove. So that's even laughable. I would say laughable because first-degree murder says there has to be intent to the crime. So we're probably going to see a trial in which he's found not guilty of first-degree murder, and then perhaps is found guilty to a far lesser charge. So the criminal justice system is at fault as well, and that's the third component that most people aren't looking at.
Well, it sounds like, based on what you're saying, that we're looking at a complete failure of oversight in the American justice system. So, if I may ask, how can that be reformed to ensure that these type of incidents stop happening or become much more rare?
Well, as you mentioned, the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020 triggered a lot of protests. It also triggered legislation. That's why they were wearing body cameras, because of the protests that had taken place in this country. And also the legislation that was proposed, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which would have national criminal justice reform. That legislation, or proposed legislation, is languishing in Congress. That's one thing that I think the general public is going to ask of whoever the next president of the United States is, especially if it's Kamala Harris, a woman of color, that she make sure that that legislation is passed, that she does everything in her power to pass the legislation that reforms our criminal justice system. But we also have to put pressure on our prosecutors. As I said, in this one case and in George Floyd, there was a special prosecutor brought in, but there are 1,200 cases. Where are the prosecutors in those cases across the country? So we must have pressure on our prosecutors to actually do their jobs as readily as they would prosecute someone who's a civilian who would commit the same crime against another civilian. We have to have them prosecute the police who are so often killing unarmed civilians with impunity, and prosecutors doing nothing about it, not even seeking indictments, let alone bringing charges and cases against these people. And the last point I have to make, when there is a civil case brought, that civil case, that's not criminal. Nothing comes out of the pocket of the police officer. In a civil case, taxpayer money pays the victim's family in a case of police-involved civilian shooting when it's found that the person's rights were violated. Not the police officer's paycheck, it's the taxpayer's paycheck. So we have to have a way that sends a message to police officers they cannot commit these crimes with impunity, and prosecutors must do their jobs.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. That was law professor Gloria Browne-Marshall from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. Thank you very much for speaking with us.